sentinel power core nearby. You can use it to activate the mech and clear a path forward.
Aha. Let's see here. So I believe I have an option to, let's see, do I need to upgrade this? Guess I can't do that right now. I would love to be able to zoom in right now. Yeah, there's some nice medium poly modeling going on basically everywhere now that I look. Even small props like this tend to have it, just like this this large hand that I'm standing on. It's really nice work on their part. Oh, this is nice. You can see basalt columns here. That's something that you see in a lot of areas that are or have been volcanic in the past, and they've solidified. It's a nice little touch to have that next to this flowing lava. I do kind of wish that this lava stream was a little more broken up, though, but what you gonna do? Oh, interesting. So it looks like this stream of lava is all one long band of polygons that's sort of getting a little bit of displacement in it. It's interesting that the lava seems to be sort of stretched along it. I would expect it to have more distinct islands. It's a kind of interesting art direction decision. And once again, this is an area where I would probably expect that there would be more bloom if I was on an HDR display, or at least it'd be much brighter. Still looks quite nice though. I like a lot of the breakup that they have on those cliff faces down there. It feels really nice. It gives a lot of nice silhouette read too. I find it pretty interesting that in areas like this where you're really up close to this wall, you can actually still see that there are a lot of sharp edges in the model. Like this area just right in the middle of the screen, you can see that there's a sharp polygonal edge. I would have expected them to add a lot more detail and better transitions there. It's interesting that they decided to do it in this way. I'm curious if they did that specifically so that you could get better shading from a distance, or if it had something to do with technical constraints. Really not sure. Alright, let's see if I can make this jump. Aha! Alright. Where are we? What do we got? Ooh, I hear somebody. Uh-oh. I really like the way that they did the gore modeling here too. If you watch the Digital Foundry video, you can see that these are actually chunks that get knocked off the base model, as opposed to it being something kind of like Left 4 Dead 2 did, which is more of a GPU-based solution where they essentially have real-time booleans. I think it's interesting that they customized each model in this way. It seems like a lot of work, but it's really cool. Looks nice. And the way that they do those separations with cutting stuff in half is also really, really solid. I like that. It must have taken a lot of work to actually get all that stuff working, especially with the ragdoll effects. By the way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm going to be taking a look at there periodically just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Oh man, I love this door. Oh, and see, this is really nice composition too. Look at the way that the big summoning circles right above this door. There's like this repetition of circles and symbols. Super nice. That's really cool. Can I get up here? Yeah, this is another example of some interesting gameplay space. They, I would expect that I'd be able to jump on top of things like this column right here, but they specifically set up the collision so that you can't get up there. It once again feels a lot like a multiplayer space. There's lots of really interesting decisions they made here. Yeah, same here. These things that are only at eye height, I'd expect to be able to jump on them, but they just block it off to sort of funnel you towards this door. There's some really nice effects too. You can see that they just have some essentially cylinders that are just rotating with these glowing textures on them. But the overall effect is really nice. There's also just a little bit of dimensionality to this, to each one of them. I can't tell if that's so that they. I can't tell if it's because they have camera-facing polygons or if it's actually a little cylinder that they made. But the overall effect is nice because it doesn't fade out along the outside edges like you often see with particle effects like this. Just gonna have a little bit of my yogurt. Now let's see what's going on here. Aha. I assume that was a switch. What do we got? Is there anything interesting over here? Well, there's a hole with a wall. I believe this is where I just came from, if I'm not mistaken. So I will say, it is a little bit frustrating for me, as someone who likes to do sort of exploration of areas outside the playable or normal playable area, to not be able to explore things like up on top of here. I really like being able to do that, so it's a little bit frustrating. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I just want to go places I'm not supposed to. Oh, interesting. Oh, I'm supposed to go down there for the sequence to work. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, and they've got one of these swingy thingies, these monkey bars. Looks like there's a secret down there. Now, what did that do for me? No idea. Can I get over there? Oh, I see. I can jump over here. I find it interesting that they don't seem to have used much of any scans or anything like that for a lot of these rocks. They clearly had an idea of what they were looking for in terms of how the rocks are supposed to look, and they're supposed to be, you know, a little bit video gamey, a lot like a lot of the other art in this game. They're not leaning on realism; they're leaning on it evoking a certain feeling, which I think is interesting. It's a kind of a, I don't know if it's bold, but it's certainly a distinctive art direction choice, especially these days with so many games leaning really heavily on realism. Ooh, wrong buttons. I'm bad at this, but that's okay. Alright, where to? Can I... Let's see here. I don't think I can climb that. Can I do... Nope. Nope. Well, found the lava. Let's see here. So I go up there. Aha. Here we go. Now, I am expecting that there are going to be a bunch of enemies popping out as soon as this one is triggered. So let's see what happens. No? No, not yet. But man, I do love this door. Let's take a closer look at this. Oh man. So this is super nice. You can see that a lot of these skull shapes are actually three-dimensional. In fact, the entire door has a lot of depth to it. It's really beautiful. I do wish that they had a little bit more high-res textures. I mean, you can see that this was baked from a high poly as opposed to being the sort of medium poly modeling that you see in other places. It looks great from a distance. It has this almost like wooden feel to it, even though it's made of metal. But I will say, I wish, especially since it's mirrored, I wish they had used up some of their resources and given it a really, really high-res texture so that chunky stuff like this was a little more crisp. They could have even done it with multiple textures, though of course that would cause lots and lots of memory fetching and stuff, which is not exactly, well, it's a little bit antithetical to their approach in terms of performance. I find it pretty interesting looking at a lot of this stuff that there isn't more concentrated areas of rust and smooth stuff. So for example, this entire thing, aside from some edges, is basically all rust. There's not a lot of bare metal. There aren't any visible drips or anything like that. I mean, given that this is all supposed to be hellish and horrible, I'd expect, I guess, more wear and tear. So I find it pretty interesting that, from an art direction standpoint, that they didn't decide to go in that direction. It'd be fairly easy with some vertex painting to fade in things like dripping and grunge that gets into the tight crevices. I mean, some of that's already visible. You can see that there are dark areas along here, and then as it goes higher up, things start to smooth out. But I kind of wish they had done even more. Like, I kind of wish that there were visible scratch marks in this area where someone would be using their hands to push open the door. You know, all these demon guys seem to have claws and other stuff, so I kind of wish that they had done something like that to make it feel more like it's actually been used. But what you gonna do? Alright, let's take a look at this. Let's see what's gonna happen. It's nice. Ooh. There's two of them. Three. See, that's a really nice, I mean, it's kind of an on the nose, but it's a really nice composition. I like that a lot. I love it when games do this sort of big reveal. It always feels great, especially in things like this, or say Dark Souls or Bloodborne, when you're pushing open a door. It's so nice. It's always fun to see. It kind of makes no sense in a lot of ways. It's not logical, but just from a sort of reveal and gameplay standpoint, I just freaking love it. Oop, those guys aren't happy that I'm here. Hello. Hey, buddy. Gonna shoot you. Ooh, that's the wrong one to use. Okay. Let's get up close and personal. Woo! Oh, yeehaw! Yoicks! I have to say, as someone who's done their fair share of damage models and LODs. It must have been a real pain for the team to come up with an effective way to do the damage models that you see for a lot of these, especially given the way that they do things like cutting off limbs or cutting characters in half during these glory kills. It must have just taken so much time and effort to get it all right. So it's really impressive the level of quality that they've achieved here, especially for these glory kills. One thing I do wish, though... Oh, hey! One thing I do wish is that some of the glory kills were actually slower, so I had time to really appreciate them. See, I'd like to be able to take, you know, a full second or two, and... Oh, I am completely out of ammo! Alright. Let's use my chainsaw. There we go, yeah. See, that was a huge pain to actually get working, I'm sure. So, I'm really impressed with the quality they were able to achieve. Oh boy. Also, they have some surprisingly weighty animations for how short the animation cycles are for things like those glory kills. It's pretty impressive the amount of detail and weight they're able to kind of pack into those short little vignettes. I'm genuinely impressed. It's very good stuff. But it's what I would expect from a company like id Software. They're incredibly skilled at what they do, and regardless of how you feel about things like maybe their gameplay or their visual design, you've got to appreciate their craftsmanship and how much work they pour into what they do. Hey, buddy. Also, as someone who's incredibly bad at video games, it's nice being able to play through some of this stuff and not feel like I'm being horribly punished. I like that they have so many varied difficulty settings. It makes me feel like they actually care about getting a wide variety of people to be able to play their games. There we go. Alright, is that it? Sounds like things are calming down. Definitely want to take a look around this arena, but still some music, so I assume somebody's still left. Oh, it's fading. Well, let's see here. So yeah, let's take a look around here. This is a really nice arena. And as I mentioned before, they definitely lean really hard on their history of being multiplayer game developers to use the lessons they learn to turn multiplayer arena-based combat into something that you can play in single player, which is really, really cool. It's something that you don't see in a lot of games. I mean, often you'll see games where there are combat arenas, but they're not designed with the type of verticality and other gameplay elements that you see in this game. So, one thing I find interesting about this specific arena is that it's different from a lot of others that we've seen so far, especially in that the floor is lava! So in a lot of previous combat arenas that we've seen before, the entire space, or most of the space, is essentially safe, and it's just to allow you to move around and fight enemies in an interesting way, learn their movements and their the way that they're programmed for combat. Whereas here, you have something entirely different. You have something where now that you know what these enemies do... Oh, just found the lava again. Now that you know what each of the enemies do, and you're a little more experienced, now they're counting on you being able to beat those enemies with the added complication of them not only not only being surrounded by enemies, but also having an additional complication, which is the floor or large portions of the floor being incredibly dangerous to stand on for any extended period. So basically what they're showing in this arena is, okay, we've introduced all these concepts to the player. We've introduced how the enemies move and react. Now that they have mastery of it, they have to learn mastery of something else. So they're both adding a challenge, and they're sort of showing you that you have mastered something already. So they're kind of they're leaning on the idea that the player has learned before. They've played through enough of the game, and they've encountered enough of these enemies that they know what to do, and they can start layering things into these combat arenas. So I really, really like this flowing lava shader that they have down here. It looks really, really believable, especially if you look right over here where the reticle is. You can see that there's an area where the lava starts to cool off and turn black, and some parts of it sort of start to fade or bloom into these bright orange glowing areas. So one of the ways that they do that is with flow maps and with different height maps and that type of thing. Let's see. I wonder how they make the lava look like it's moving like that. Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. So let's take a look over. Let's see here. Can I get to a good place for it? Here's a good place to view from. So let's see if we can find. Yeah, here. So here is an area with lava that's moving up in one direction, down and across in another direction. If you look closely right in this area, you can see that there's essentially a seam going across where the lava is, it's coming up and then it's kind of splitting off. Now, the way that you can control something like that in a shader is by using a flow map, which is essentially, it's a lot like a normal map. It defines directions where things should go, but instead of defining the direction that, for example, light should be reflecting or something like that, the flow map defines the sort of linear direction that something should scroll across the UVs. So essentially your UVs are just a gradient of white to black, up and down and side to side, so that they're layered in two color channels, and those color channels, or they're represented as color channels in a lot of visualization. Those color channels can alter the way that something moves across the UVs this way, or in any direction. So basically what you're saying is, if you have a gradient from black to white, that means that if something is scrolling across the U direction of the UVs like this, you can change how fast it gets to one spot by changing where this white or black value is. So if the black is over here and the white is over here, and you put a dot of black right here, what it's going to do is it's going to shift the UVs for the scrolling texture to match whatever is over here with this value over here. So basically what you're saying is you are modifying the UVs just with color values or lightness and darkness values, so that it's basically saying, no, the UVs in this little chunk right here of this square, this little spot right here, they're actually the same as this over here, or this over here, or this up here. You can modify any of the information in this UV square so that so that the shader basically says, okay, these areas are the same, even though they're in completely different spots. So if you're animating something, you can have something animating across, but if it's, for example, a lighter value across this entire strip right in the middle, that will modify how quickly it goes from one end to the other. It'll sort of slow down and want to stay in this area over here, because right over here is a little more white, and right over here is usually darker. If it's scrolling like this, that middle part's going to scroll at a different rate, And then you can modulate that and fade things in on top so that you can have these multiple scrolling textures going at different rates. And since you can modify both the U and V channels, the U and V channels with these different values, you can actually make it so that there are directions that you can go across the UVs. So this entire area where there is lava has its own UV set, and these UVs are, depending upon how they're set up, they might be, it might all be one piece, it might be tiling, blah 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 blah. But for the purposes of this level, they're all laid out flat. They have a texture scrolling across them like this, and then you have that flow map which modulates how much it can move up or down in the UVs just based on those lightness values. So that's what they're doing right here. You can see that the lava sort of splits off to the sides, and where it's sort of splitting off, you can see that there's a little bit of I guess it's like a weird fading artifact where it looks like it's kind of pushing into and against each other. But they do something really smart where they, it looks like they have multiple layers sort of fading across each other, so you don't notice the weird transition there. You can also see that along the edges there of where the rocks are, it's darker. That's an area where they might actually use the same texture to modulate the lightness of, or the color, and modulate the speed at which the UVs are being scrolled across. So it ends up being the situation where it's slower right next to this rock, and then as it gets farther from the rock, it goes faster and faster and faster until it reaches the middle of the stream, and then it fades back to darker over here and gets faster in the middle. So yeah, that's a very complicated explanation for how scrolling UVs and flow maps work. But yeah, this lava shader is really, really nice because they're fading between a lot of different textures, a lot of different colors, and a lot of different levels of bloom and just normal material. Oh, this is interesting. So over here, you can actually see that there's a little more lava flowing across this lump. And it's sort of like going over and under and around. But it doesn't seem to have quite the same shader as what's on the lava. Yeah, I'm genuinely impressed with this lava shader because it has the same sort of nice rounded and wobbly striations and areas of cooling and peeling and cracking that real lava does. It's very clearly this really hot, sticky lava that you see in a lot of very slow, consistent lava flows. I really love it. So what else do we have over here? We got some glow on the basalt columns. Got some glow right here. I'm curious how they did the glow on a lot of these things. You can see that it's generally much lower res. You can see that there's some pixelation here. It's generally a lot lower resolution than the textures underneath it, which makes me think that it's probably, well, it's almost certainly a secondary texture, which is maybe at like half the resolution or a quarter of the resolution. And they're using that as a mask for the emissive channel. Now, I'm curious what type of bit depth they have for things like the emissive channel. It looks like it's the same bit depth as the rest of the scene. I know that some engines, they will only use the emissive channel to lighten up what's already on the screen in terms of the albedo. So, it ends up that you essentially just have a grayscale map, and if you try to use more colors in it, it looks kind of chunky and gross and has banding. This looks nice and smooth around the edges, though, and I think it's probably, especially since it's using a very clearly different texture, I think it's probably just it's got its own colored emissive. Anyway, let's take a look elsewhere. I'm kind of curious about all this fleshy organic stuff. I wonder, since I haven't really paid too much attention to it, if it actually has subsurface scattering. It looks like it does a little right here. There's some nice softness to it in the diffuse that looks like they're sort of extending the light terminator, but I'm not sure what type of shader it would be, especially since all this is forward rendered. It's kind of tough to make effective skin shaders in forward rendering without them looking kind of odd. I do notice that there is a big difference in material read between this lump right here and this sort of pinkish veiny stuff. I'm curious if they're using a different shader model or lighting model rather for the different chunks to sort of give them more variety. It's very interesting. I would have expected them to just be really fleshy and gross, but that's not always the case. I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that, for example, these big toothy horn things don't have subsurface scattering, and then maybe anything that's attached to them doesn't. Really not sure. But let's take a little more looking around and then find wherever the hell we're supposed to go. Let's see here. The decals in this game are really nice too. They do a great job of blending in with the ground around them. Like here you can see that there's a blood decal that was probably left over from one of the enemies I killed, or it could have just been placed there by hand. But in a lot of cases you'll end up with weird transitions between the ground that the decal is sitting on and the decal itself, but in these cases it's hardly even noticeable that they're using different shaders or anything like that. There's some really great material read here. Let's go take a look over here. Let's look at some dirt! This ground is interesting because it you can definitely see that there's some sand. Like right here, these little mini sand dunes or ripples. They look really nice, but I find it interesting that they have this sort of crackled texture on them. That's not something I'd expect to see on realistic sand. I'd expect it to be a lot more grainy, and if I was going to, say, make a sand shader for this specifically, I'd probably do some screen space tricks to get some sparkle and jitter to make it actually look like there are individual grains of sand that are glinting in the light. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't do that, but I think they're probably leaning pretty heavily on some very simple materials that are essentially just albedo normal gloss with occasional specular variations. I am kind of surprised that they don't have much color variation in things like this sand. A lot of the textures, aside from the rock textures, seem to have very sort of flat albedo colors. Like these veins right here, there isn't a lot of noticeable color variation, which I think it's kind of interesting, especially given that veins tends to be something where you would expect to see like pulsing colors or multiple different colors of them. They do have some of that in some of these larger pieces, but not on stuff like this. And I'm curious if that was an art direction decision or some limitation that they were working with in terms of tools, or maybe just in terms of the overall palette they were going for. I mean, if you take a look back here, you will notice that you have these big blocks of color and light and shadow, so you can clearly see this defining line where the playable area starts, and then there are these big dramatic cast shadows, but there isn't a lot of color, hue, or value variation in those things. I think they probably did that for gameplay's sake, to make it so that the enemies pop out a lot more from the background. Because like even right here, almost all this stuff seems to be the same hue, even though it has different normal maps and different gloss maps. And I think yeah, it must be that. Yeah, and you can even see that the bones are mostly the same hue aside from their lighting. I think they probably must have done that so that, for example, an imp standing right there is going to really pop out from the background because it has big hue and saturation variances. I really like this doorway. This is a nice doorway. Really good use of repeating elements all throughout the game. You can see that, like this little bit right here, these little guys with they're holding up the skulls. I mean, these appear within the first couple seconds of the game, and they just bring them throughout the entire thing, which is not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a sign that they didn't put a lot of work in. It's more a sign that they prioritized building a consistent set of materials to build all their sort of hellish architecture with, which I think is great. I kind of wish more games would do similar, because a lot of games tends to have this problems with consistency in that realm. Oh, here's the bad guy. Okay, bud. Okay, bud. Okay. Ah, wow, you're fast. You move quick for a fat guy. Or a fat brain, rather. Oop. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Ooh. And so here's more of the vertex painting I was talking about last time. You can see that this whole area has multiple different layers sort of pasted on top of each other and painted across each other. You have this really nice transition from this rocky stuff over here all the way into some sandy dunes over here, which, once again, I wish they were a little more grainy. And then over the top of all of that, you have these little veiny bits. Oh, this is a nice little touch. So somebody on the art team took the time to align this prop and this texture. It might have been an accident, but to make it look like it was growing out of there. That's, if nothing else, it's a happy accident. But yeah, there's some really great transitions in this game. Like look right here. You have this big stone wall prop with these big old chunky, grainy, broken up pieces of stone. And then it just fades into this grungy, gross stuff, and then immediately starts to fade down into rubble and bones and rock. And there's barely any visible transition that doesn't feel natural. Like right here, you can actually see that there's a transition between the bricks and the whatever this gross dented stuff is, and it feels very natural because you can still see some of the pattern of the bricks underneath. And I don't know how they did that. I think it looks great, and I don't know how they did that. It looks like it might be one contiguous model, but it could also be models layered on top of each other and blended somehow. This is one area where having that restricted palette is, and the sort of restriction in hue and saturation, that type of thing, is really helpful because you don't notice the transition very well. You just know, oh, it goes from one thing to the next, and there's realistic overlaps, and that's it. Oh, hey, they were just letting you know that what you're doing is really cool and informative. Thanks. Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for stopping by. It's nice to hear that. Just make sure I have time. Yeah, got about 20 minutes left till I have to get back to work, so let's continue. Oh, well, that's really gross looking. This is a really nice vista shot. Now, if you look closely down here, you'll see some details in the lava that look like they're sort of mirror images of each other, right next to each other. So the reason for that has to do with the flow maps and scrolling UVs again. So the reason that this happens is once you get to a certain point as you're scrolling across UVs, you get to a point where things start to repeat, and that's fine for small scale areas because you don't notice it as much, but in large areas like you see down here, you end up having to fade between different things because the texture that's kind of scrolling across at different angles and rates starts to get more and more deformed just because as it goes from over here being deformed to scrolling across and looping back around, it gets more and more deformed and twisted, and it just becomes this crunchy pixel soup. So what you end up having to do with when you're using flow maps for, say, flowing lava or flowing water, is you actually have two textures that are scrolling across at different rates. And once one scrolls across, you get to a certain point and you fade it out so that you don't notice all that gross pixel soup, and you fade the other one in gradually. Usually you can do this with a sort of a triangle wave, so that it's just like an even blend between one. It just goes blend to one, blend to the other, blend to one, blend to the other. And ideally what you'll have is some sort of modulation texture between them that says, okay, this little noisy spot right here, I'm going to fade in at a different rate than this little noisy spot right here. But for large scale stuff like this, where it goes fairly slow, usually you don't even need that, because people generally aren't going to notice. It goes so slow and it's so far away that people will just be like, yep, that's lava, and then just keep walking. And they walk into a pole. Oh yeah. Really appreciate you analyzing the art in the game. It's really helping with thinking about things I wouldn't have otherwise. And this stream alone is more informative than my college was. Well, thanks, guys. That's great to hear. I'm just doing this because it's the type of stuff that I'm really interested in, and I genuinely love hearing things like that. I like helping people learn stuff about the things that I'm passionate about, and I'm really passionate about sort of the art and tech and where they intersect. So this is just a perfect example of that. So it's good to know that this is informative for other people. And this looks like a little area that I can jump to. Let's see if they actually blocked it off, kind of like those little combat arenas. Yep. So that's interesting. Let's take a look back over there. So there's some... I personally would call this a bad decision. So I'll explain what I mean. So in this area where I am right now, you can see over here, over there, over here, the spot where I'm standing, this spot up here where I was just looking at this stone wall, and basically everything out to here, then everything over there. This is all gameplay area. This is all area where I can explore, I can move around, and the way that it's set up with these multiple different tiers, for example, I'm on one tier, that's a tier down there, that's another tier that's in my same level right now. These are all gameplay accessible areas. They have, they let me go to them. They're not blocked off for any reason. I can move around this column right here, unobstructed. I can go down here, I can climb up there, I can drop back down. I'm completely unobstructed in these areas, and I can also climb up here. Now, what this is communicating to me, and it might not be this way for anybody else, but what this is communicating to me, especially since there's a doorway over here leading to a slightly stepped down area, is that basically any area that looks like it's accessible in this specific little arena probably is accessible. So what we have over here is accessibility right up to here, and then that area right there isn't accessible. It has a collision blocker right there, so I can't actually get over there. So what this is telling me is that either people just didn't notice, or there was just some sort of miscommunication or something during the development of this specific area that led to someone putting this little terrace right over here, and instead of making it drastically lower or drastically higher to communicate that I'm not supposed to go over there. So I personally would call that just bad communication of gameplay concepts. That's something where a lot more testing and a lot more paying attention to your testers, especially if they're people like me who like to kind of explore, that's where it becomes really important. This is why things like accessibility and user interface and user experience research are all really important for making sure that you have a smooth gameplay experience and that more people can play your game. This is one of those things where if I was playing on a really hard mode and I didn't know that I couldn't go over there, I might jump over there thinking there was a secret and then just fall into the lava and be very frustrated. But that's neither here nor there. Ooh, so this is cool. Take a look at that spine. That is really gross and really gory, but it's also really cool. I love the sort of sinew that's pulling apart there. It looks like this thing was chewed on by something else. That's really neat. So this over here also looks like an area that is accessible to me. So let's see if I can jump over there. Yep. Yep. So it's really important to communicate. Oh, what is this? Dash refill. Grab a dash refill to completely refill dash meter. Oh my god, I'm going to be very bad at this. Stuff like this is why it's really important to communicate gameplay concepts through visuals and art. Speaking of interesting visuals and art, look at that. That's a gigantic leg. Gigantic butt. Well, fairly small in comparison, but that's okay. Oh, this is weird. It looks like a dinosaur. Okay, let's continue. Here's more of that nice flowing lava. They got really good collision on here. In some games, if you got too close to this lava, like for example right here, you might start taking damage. But I think what they might do is have, say, a plane underneath the level of this lava that probably damages you, so that if you're up here, you're not touching the plane. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I just started touching the plane. Okay. Now let's see here. Oh, there's more of that nice medium poly work. You can see there's nice big chunky bevels. Ah, so nice. Alright, let's see if I can do this. Hey, I did it. Oh! Alright, let's climb up here. Okay. Ooh, look at this. This is lovely. Look at all the detail that they have packed in here. You can actually see that this repeating pattern right here, they would have unwrapped this entire circle as a rectangle going across the UVs, and since it's a rectangle, they can just have it go just across some sort of line in the UVs instead of having to bake something as a big circle or something like that. So what they're using right now is these gigantic trim sheets that have really high-res textures. Oh, you can actually see some Z fighting right here. You can see that those little areas where these sort of toothy things connect, they're a little bit too close to the surface of the rest, so they're actually they're fighting to see what's on top. It's just a fun little error. Let's get this guy. Boink. What do we got? Ah, see, this is really cool. It's all just mirrored detail, but or you know, copied and pasted or something like that. But oh, hi guys. Let's see here. Whoops. Let's see. Yeah, so this is all just like replicated mirrored detail. They might have modeled this whole thing as a straight line and then curved it into a circle, or they might have just like taken a bunch of cylinders and placed them and beveled them and stuff. But regardless, it ends up looking super nice. See, here's more of the vertex painting in action. You can see that they just have tons of layered materials, and it's just like one on top of another, and they can mix and match them across the entire model. And as long as they keep consistent texel density so that things have a very consistent size on the UVs, things like this this layered kind of goopy growing stuff is just going to look good no matter what, because they're just painting it on and it has these nice transition textures and stuff. But yeah, you can see that this little middle area in here is transitioning perfectly to the edge right there, because whatever shader this is sort of smoothing out the polygon normals so that it's just, or the vertex normals, so that it's just a nice transition from one to the next, even though all of this it looks like, yeah, it's just 2D flat on the surface. Really cool stuff. Very, very nicely done. Really good material work here. hear something. I wonder if I can get up here. Nope. Okay. What do we got? Ooh. I do love cracked floors. So this is another interesting thing. Right here, there's a collision blocker. I'm trying to go forward, but I can't. And this is something that I don't know, I think it's actually a little bit weird that they set things up this way. Can I go over here? Nope, collision blocker there too. Yeah, they have a very definite way that they want you to interact with the environment here. What is texel density? Oh, so texel density, if you have a polygon, which is just call it a square. If you have a square and you have a texture, it's also a square, it's possible to take that texture and apply it to that polygon, which is what you're doing with all the textures in this entire game. Now, on that polygon, you can actually have that texture repeat. So like a repeating pattern, and the pattern can get smaller and smaller while retaining all the same pixels. It'll just be smaller, and you can see it repeat as many times as you want, really. So texel density means how many times you have, how many times a texture could repeat across that polygon, or in an example where it's not a tiling texture, but is instead a unique texture like you see on the gun right here. Texel density refers to how many pixels per polygon there are. So if you have a square, you could divide this square up kind of like a checkerboard, like that, and you could have it be, for example, 8 pixels across on this square. Or you could have a much larger texture so that there are more pixels crammed into that square. What that means is that when you are taking the UV maps, which are essentially the model completely laid flat as a bunch of individual pieces, if you take those individual pieces and you arrange them the right way on this UV map, on this square where the texture is going to be, you can actually resize those different chunks, especially on something that's organic where it's kind of tough to unwrap it, kind of like the skin from a cow or something. It's hard to get that flat because it's naturally curved. You're going to get different densities and different sizes of texture space being used per polygon, and that's texel density. It's how many pixels there are, how dense it is per polygon. Texel is not really a word. It's something that was made up a while ago. It really just means texture density or pixel density per polygon. And texel density is important in computer graphics because it will affect how blurry something is, how sharp something is, whether something is nice and crisp or really kind of gross and blobby. So, for example, there are a couple of different examples of texel density in this screen right here. So on this big pole thing right here that the gigantic Space Marine guy is holding, you can see that there's this really tight, really detailed pitted texture. And then right next to it, you can see that there's a slightly different, slightly blurrier texture. These probably have different texel densities, more pixels packed in per polygon on this big pole, whereas this one has fewer. And then in comparison to either of those, the texel density of my gun is much higher. So, for example, you can see the little ridges on that cylinder right next to the aiming reticle. They're very tightly defined. They're super crisp and small, and those are probably textured in. They have an even tighter texel density than this big long pole. Texel density also has a lot to do with how well things render on screen. So, for example, in a lot of cases, you want more pixels per scene or per screenshot in textures than you have pixels on the screen. And what that does is, as long as you have more than one pixel in textures than you have pixels on the screen, what you're doing is you're displaying, say this is the pixel on my screen that's actually glowing, and I'm looking at it, and the tips of my fingers are two individual pixels in a texture. If they're both being displayed together, that's actually going to look really nice as long as they're on the same pixel, because what it's going to do is it's going to kind of average them out and make it look like there's some really nice crunchy, chunky, tight detail that's being packed into every single pixel on the screen. So for an example of that, for a more like real world example, that's not just an explanation, I can look at this big long pole that's cutting across the screen right here, and since I'm so far away, there are multiple pixels on the textures being packed into individual textures on the screen. So it's like having a bunch of noisy dots all packed into one, and they're being averaged out. And as you move the view, you're getting this situation where it's a little bit sparkly, or can kind of be sparkly because things are popping between different pixels, and they're averaging out differently. But the overall effect is that it seems really high res. It's really tight, really detailed, and as long as you can keep it so that there's at least 1-to-1 ratio of screen pixels to texture pixels, you're going to have a really nice looking, really smooth, or really detailed feeling presentation. Now, where the hell am I supposed to go? I can't jump up here. Oh, wait, can't. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so I guess I'm going this way. So, I was talking about this before with the big hand that I was standing on, but looks like they're doing the same thing with this big Space Marine model, which is they're modeling at sort of medium poly resolutions, which means that essentially they're modeling everything that you see on screen right here at the final density that's going to appear in the game, and then not even worrying about baking textures from a higher poly source. Like, if you're taking, for example, if you're taking a game art class right now, you're probably going to learn about things like texture baking. So what that does is it essentially transfers the detail from a really high detail model to a lower detail model. But in this case, they're not doing any of that stuff. Now, the primary reason to do that is so that you can get higher detail on something. For example, like you could have like this bump or these rivets on a lower detail model by having that information in textures. But in this case, they're just modeling out all the detail and putting it in the game. And then on top of that, they're just layering more detail with decals. So you can see that, let's see here, let's take a look at this hand. So this hand is essentially the same as another hand that I was looking at earlier. Like this bolt, this big scratches, any of these silver bits, these are all just decals. They're flat stamps that are laid onto the existing geometry to make it feel like it's more high resolution. But it's all just, like this big chunk right here. All this is most likely just completely flat. Like even this big chunky thing on the corner doesn't look like it's actually cut out. It looks like it's just a decal slapped on there. And you can do that by layering things with either polygons that are slapped on there that have individual textures on them, or you can do it by layering things in the shader so that you have one big master material that has all sorts of different information in it, and you can move chunks around. Like, for example, if my shirt had a shader on it that was supposed to be made for multiple different types of shirts, I might be able to switch this NASA logo or change it from this t-shirt material to something like a plaid flannel or something like that. And those are two different ways that you can apply detail like this. And yeah, this is all being modeled at final res, and then little tiny textures are being applied to the whole thing. It's really impressive. This entire model right here, this entire mech, is I don't know. It's probably a million polygons. Just because of how detailed it is and how many decals there are, all these wires and stuff. I've worked on very similar assets that were, after all was said and done, yeah, well over a million triangles. And the key ends up being that you just split it up into all kinds of different chunks, and each of the individual chunks has different levels of detail so that they can turn on and off in the distance or as you get closer. Alright, let's open this up. Oh, and I'm going to have to kick off in a minute here. Gotta get back to work. Oh, that is gross. I love the way that those guts were just slopping off of the tip of the spear. It was really nice, really disgusting detail, which I really appreciate. Alright, and now that I've gotten to these checkpoints, yeah, here we go. This is probably going to be where it saves next. Or I'm going to save. Do I need to? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm going to head off right now, but thanks for coming by. It's always fun, playing games and describing details and stuff like this. I'm going to try to do the next stream on Friday. I'm going to try to keep it to a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule around noon Pacific Standard Time. So tune in next time. I'll see you guys later.